Hey, welcome to Tape, powered by Ram, MotorTrend's back-to-back winner of Truck of the Year. I'm Ryan Dixon. I'm a writer for Sportsnet.ca. Joining me, as always, Sportsnet's Rory Boylan, the NHL editor. And before we jump into any playoff action here today, Rory, got to talk about Dale Hawerchuk. Dale passed, obviously, earlier this week. The tributes are pouring in, and lots to read out there. Lots up at Sportsnet.ca if you want to check out what our guy Sonny Sachdeva and Ken Wiebe have to say about a man who was revered in the hockey community, coached your hometown Barrie Colts, and was a guy who just, it often got lost in the shuffle, but put up monster numbers in the 1980s and really helped put the Winnipeg Jets 1.0 on the map during their infancy.
Yeah, I think hockey fans of a certain age recognize his greatness and will always know him for the, absolute superstar that he was. But, you get to hockey fans that are a little younger and you'll see his numbers and they definitely jump off the page, but you might not really fully grasp his impact and his greatness. And it's almost a shame for the era that he played in, because if Hawerchuk played almost in any other era in NHL history, I think his name would be known by everybody of all ages for the greatness that he brought. But it was just because he was always playing against and scoring against Wayne Gretzky and Mario Lemieux and his Winnipeg Jets teams in that division. I mean, they were never able to get over the Calgary/Edmonton hump. And
It was a big hump.
It was a huge hump. Like, those are, especially the Oilers, legendary teams. And so in that sense, it was just kind of, almost wrong place, wrong time kind of thing. But I mean, he was one of the premier playmakers for a long time, even after Winnipeg traded him to Buffalo. Even towards the end of his career, down the stretch there, he was still one of the better playmakers in the NHL. So while, Gretzky's numbers are celebrated for being so amazing, and even when he got to the end of his career, he was still competing with some of the best. The same can be said for Hawerchuk, and he started to have to deal with some of that dead puck era at the end of his career too, and he was still putting up respectable numbers. So, and I think it's been said, it's been written, it's been said in video form too, that that 87 Canada Cup, one of the greatest games, if not the greatest game ever played, Hawerchuk was the MVP of that game. He won that face-off that led to the Gretzky-Lemieux attack down the ice and that historic goal. So Hawerchuk has just been involved in so many moments. His numbers stand the test of time. And for anybody who's not young enough to have seen him or really understand where his place is in the game, I would recommend going back and watching that 87 game, going back and seeing some of his highlights and reviewing his numbers. He is absolutely incredible. And he ranked behind those two guys in that era, but I don't know if he would rank behind anybody else. He was certainly one of the absolute best during his time.
Won the face-off, and just a little hook going up the ice there to clear a little room for number 66. What a player. All our support and thoughts to the Hawerchuk family in a really tough time. All right, we will turn our attention to the NHL playoffs that continue to chug along here. We're going to bring in Samantha Pell of the Washington Post. She covers the Capitals, a team that is in dire straits. They did win Game 4 against the New York Islanders, but they're in real tough after falling in a 3-0 hole. We're going to talk about the prospects for, maybe mounting a little bit of a fight, but really assuming this is it for the Capitals, where do they go from here? There's a lot of questions for a team that, this would be 2 years in a row out in the first round at a bit of a crossroads there. We're also going to talk about teams that are looking real good to get through to round 2 or are already there. In the case of the Vegas Golden Knights, the Colorado Avalanche are up on the Coyotes and, starting to glimpse some of that potential people see for them. And what about those Islanders who, for the second year in a row, appear poised to knock off a behemoth in round 1? Let's talk about Vegas since they're through, Rory. They, of course, played the lowest ranked team in the West, the Chicago Blackhawks, 5 games. This is a team that you and I believe has a good chance to get to the final. I guess there's nothing that we saw in the first round that would change that line of thinking. They do seem ready to go with 2 goaltenders, and this is going to be a tough team to knock off.
So tough. I mean, they can throw all kinds of things at you, and they can definitely score, as we saw in the Chicago series. But the thing is, it's hard to kind of take anything away from that Chicago series, because I think Mark Spector wrote it best, that series had little chance of being anything more than bug versus windshield. Just a great line. It's true though, right? Like, Chicago had no chance of being in these playoffs when the season hit pause, and they just played against an Oilers team that wasn't as structured or strong defensively, had questions of its own in net, and Chicago was able to pour on enough offense to get through. You couldn't do that against Vegas. I mean, they got offense when they needed it, it seemed, and they got a win. Game 5, they even pushed. They scored a few goals there, and it was a pretty high scoring game. But Vegas can match you in that, and then Vegas can also kind of slow you down. And if Robin Lehner or Marc-Andre Fleury, whoever's in net, I think it's going to be Lehner more often than not. I mean, those guys are steady and sturdy. Lehner can even steal you a series here or there. So they're just more well put together. Their defense, both on the blue line and just the whole team aspect of it, is way better than Chicago's. So, the Blackhawks were just completely outclassed. All you can really say is that Vegas showed exactly how they should have in that series, and that's a good thing, because I think the main worry for some of these teams coming into the round robin was they weren't playing high-tempo hockey in those 3 games. How would they, adapt to that in this first round against teams that were playing must-win best-of-5 hockey? And Vegas got a little bit of an easy toe in the water there, I think. And now they're kind of up to speed, and I think you can expect them to kind of pick up and keep going from here.
Yeah, Alec Martinez, deadline pickup, looking real good for Vegas on the back end. So, yeah, they are the Golden Knights appear to be rolling. And you said it. I mean, if you're one of the teams that didn't play a best-of-5 series, you were just worried about maybe coming out a bit flat-footed. So just to get that first round win under your belt definitely bodes well for Vegas. Colorado also well on its way there. I mean, by the time people hear this, we're recording on Wednesday. They could be through. They could still be slugging it out with the Coyotes, but I think everyone expects they're eventually going to dust the Coyotes and move on from there. Nazem Kadri, you wrote about it on Sportsnet.ca. I mean, we're here in Toronto conditioned to talking about that trade last summer in the context of what a disappointment Tyson Barrie was for the Leafs. But, I mean, obviously he's been just a complete opposite for Colorado with Kadri. Slides in there behind McKinnon. Just seems like a perfect complement. Has managed to not get suspended in the playoffs here. Congratulations, Naz, in 2020. Winning faceoffs, just everything they could hope for from that deal and in that second 2C hole.
Yeah, he was a luxury here in Toronto as their third center, because, everything about his offense to his underlying numbers still suggested that he could be a second-line center on a lot of NHL teams. And I never really was sold on that trade, because I worried about giving up that center depth from the Leafs side of things. And Kerfoot is fine and everything, but he's not Nazem Kadri. He's not going to create as much offense. He's not going to draw as many penalties. The worry, of course, and part of the reason why Kadri was traded is while he plays that line, he can step over it. And he went 2 playoffs in a row where he had suspensions in the playoffs, and Toronto just couldn't afford that anymore, and they moved on. But in Colorado, maybe he needed that kind of eye-opener of being traded away from his hometown team and starting fresh. But he still does play with that edge. He's drawn, I think it's 4 penalties at all strengths in these playoffs. And, you mentioned he hasn't taken a suspension. He hasn't even taken a penalty yet in these playoffs. So he's not hurting his team even for 2 minutes. And you look at the top scorers in the playoffs so far. Nazem Kadri at 9 points is tied for second place, 2 off of Sebastian Aho's pace. So that's incredible. And a lot of that, I think 6 points of that has come on the power play. But, that's his strength. He's there to be the 2C at even strength to support Nathan McKinnon. And after that game, McKinnon even mentioned that something that team had been missing the last year or two was a line driving second centerman that Kadri is. And so he's been that missing piece in a lot of different ways. And, he's a good teammate. He's an upbeat and confident guy, which is always a good thing to have in the playoffs too. And as long as he continues to kind of play with that edge that he's known for, draw penalties, get under opponent's skin, and not kind of lose that discipline himself, which he acknowledged he's gotten better at and needs to continue on, he's just going to continue to show that this is why he was valuable to the Leafs. This is why maybe they should have just hung on to him. Not only for all of that, his contract is even still valuable for 3 more years at $4.5 million. And in hindsight, it's 2020, of course, with the cap staying flat, but that's massive value for what Kadri brings in whichever role. And so he's just been an absolutely perfect fit here for the Colorado Avalanche in all sorts of ways. And really, like, we're still a few rounds from awarding the Stanley Cup, but if he continues this on and isn't crossing any lines, it's not unreasonable to think that Kadri could be in some Conn Smythe discussion. Nathan MacKinnon is going to be the favorite on that team all day long, but right now Kadri is competing with Nathan MacKinnon in points and providing that kind of sandpaper that they have not had in the past. So it's not crazy to think of that, I don't think.
Yeah, the twisted irony with the 2 suspensions and him not being there for the Leafs and for the, that black cloud that hung over his relationship with Toronto after that is that with the exception of, those line crossing moments notwithstanding, the guy is actually the perfect playoff player. It just so happened that his emotions got the best of him, and he screwed up. He clearly screwed up on those 2 occasions. We don't have to relitigate them now, but I mean, I think even Kyle Dubas, I'm sure, knew deep down inside, I'm kind of trading a guy that is tailor-made for the postseason. It's just that the past 2 springs, what do you do with a guy when he's not just gone over the line, but leapt over it 2 seasons in a row? And it kind of just feels like now Colorado's just going to get all the upside he's really always had for this time of year, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And, not to go too much over that trade again, but, what really made it bad for Toronto, I don't think many people would have predicted that Tyson Barrie would have been so bad of a fit as he was with Toronto this year. He was going to be the best player in that trade that Toronto needed to have an impact, and it didn't work out. But the problem was always that he only had 1 year left on his contract, where Kadri has a few more years of control for the Avalanche, and he was the best player in that trade. I think everybody acknowledged that even at the time, and that's why it was a 2-for-1. That's what made it worse for Toronto. But the fact that Kadri is doing what he's doing now in the playoffs, I mean, that's who he is. That's what his value always was. It's just now that he's not even taking penalties. He's not taking the suspensions that we've seen, but he's not even taking penalties. And so that's kind of putting him onto a whole different level.
So the Leafs' second line center is presently John Tavares, who made Kadri expendable, I guess, to some degree. Yep. We thought him leaving the New York Islanders 2 years ago was just going to further torpedo that team. And here they are. They're on the brink of being in the second round of the playoffs for the second year in a row post Tavares. They've already won 1 playoff series, the best of 5 series against Florida, to get to round 1 of the playoffs, where they shot out to a 3-0 lead on the Caps, did lose game 4, but are looking great to advance. Barry Trotz, I mean, I don't know, is this guy the consensus best coach in the NHL, or at least getting the most out of his team? I don't know how else you measure that by. They spread it around and they get it done by committee, and they play tight defense and have been getting good goaltending. And I just think they're going to continue to be a tough out no matter who is facing them.
Yeah, I mean, that Trotz question is really interesting, right? Because sometimes the Jack Adams gets awarded to a guy who has had 1 good year, his goalie went hot or something like that. But when you're actually having a discussion of, okay, who's the best coach in the game today? Look at Trotz's track record. I mean, from the first days in Nashville, building that organization up from scratch, and then years of punching above their weight and being that team that, are they going to break through? Are they going to break through? Are they going to break through? And they were always better than what they looked like they should be for most of that time for Barry Trotz. And then he finally got them to a point where they weren't breaking through and they needed a new face. He goes to Washington, and he gets that team over the hump that it was never able to get over, and wins the Stanley Cup. goes to New York, and now they're fantastic, and they're going to knock out his former team, it looks like. And it's so consistent, whatever you're going to get from him every year. Who goes against that? I mean, you're talking about Joel Quenneville, who's got an amazing track record himself, but he goes to Florida and, not the greatest team and not the greatest results. But Trotz goes to a team that's not the greatest team, and he seems to get good results wherever he goes, right? So just fantastic. I actually did pick the Islanders in this series. I picked it to go 7 games, so it's one of those, I want to pick the upset, but I'm not entirely confident in it, so I'm going to go the distance and see. I don't think anybody saw this being 4 or 5 games if it's a lot shorter. And a lot obviously is made of the team defense in New York, and the goaltending has been strong, and that's really their bread and butter. But I think what has allowed for them to continue this after losing Tavares. I mean, Tavares got the Islanders through that Florida Panthers series a few years ago with some incredible play, almost single-handedly doing it. And the question was, do they have that kind of a game breaker right now? And Matthew Barzal has certainly stepped up and shown that he is that guy, 7 points in 8 games. But also, I think there's a lot of credit here that should go Anthony Beauvillier's way. 23-year-old, he's just crossed the 20-goal mark in his career. Once, I think maybe twice. He was going to get there this year before the pause. And he's scored 3 even strength goals, 4 goals overall so far in these playoffs. And he seems to be a guy that is going to really start breaking through for those Islanders to be more of a goal scorer than what he's shown so far. And so the combination of those two guys are answering that question of, do they have those high end or close to high end offensive contributors who are going to be able to complement this defense? And they've answered that. Now they have that. And so now you're wondering, well, how far can this Islanders team go? Because there's not an obvious weakness, I don't think, right there right now. But again, last year they got through the Penguins in 4 games and then got blown out in the next round. So there's still that kind of doubt in the back of your mind. Like,
sure,
are they going to meet that team that is just a bad matchup for them?
Well, we'll have to get Justin Bourne on here soon to talk about
Do it.
the team of his youth, his dad's team that, of course, won a pile of Stanley Cups. This one doing its best to add to that total. Before we get to the team that the Islanders are currently putting have their foot on the throat of, the Washington Capitals, let's talk a little fantasy hockey, Rory. Don't forget, fans, you can sign up for the Sportsnet Fantasy Hockey Pool presented by RAM. Just go to sportsnet.ca/RAM. You can win up to, there's $50K in prizes to be won. You can win a 2020 RAM 1500 or RAM 2500. You can pick your players before every round leading up to the final, so you got a lot of chances to jump in. I'm kind of wondering if Max Pacioretty is a guy to look at. Coming back after the injury, Vegas is through, obviously, 1 goal. He's a guy who you could see in second or third round. He's one of those guys who might get 8 goals in one series if he gets hot.
100%. If you can find a way to get into that Vegas offense and pick a player who maybe is a secondary source of it, or if you can, on the Sportsnet pool, you can see how many teams, the percentage of teams own that player. If you can get one of these Vegas players who's got a lower ownership average than some of the others, I think you got to strike, because this is how they're going to win. They're going to have to score goals. That is their number one strength, and they have a couple of different lines that can do it. So if it's Pacioretty, I would look at all of these guys and kind of pick out the 1 or 2 that you think are going to have the lower ownership and try and take advantage of the upside that's there. Huge upside on that Vegas team.
All right, stick around. Samantha Pell of the Washington Post joins us next on Tape to Tape. Hey, welcome back to Tape to Tape. We're pleased to be joined now by Samantha Pell. Samantha covers the Washington Capitals for the Washington Post, and she joins us from the Toronto bubble. Samantha, how's bubble life treating you?
Bubble life is good so far after that 14-day quarantine when I couldn't leave my hotel room.
Yes.
Ever since then, it's been good, so can't complain.
Okay, well, we thought the Caps might be leaving the bubble altogether, but they did manage to win Game 4. They definitely showed something coming back, digging out of an early hole. What did you make of the game that is, at least for now, making this a series for the Capitals?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was super surprising, honestly. Those first 23 minutes, I think, was the same thing we saw the first three games. They were kind of slow, lackadaisical in their own end, just really couldn't generate anything. I think they were being out attempted. It was 16-1, only 7 minutes into the first period. So some crazy stats there. And then all of a sudden, as the Capitals can do, they have that offensive firepower. And all of a sudden, Kuznetsov goes, gets his 4-on-4 goal. And then all of a sudden, Ovechkin from the office power play goal, and this thing is all tied up. So it just can happen in a flash. And I think people maybe sometimes forget that the Capitals have all this great firepower in them, and then they can just kind of flip the switch. Now, the bigger question is, why can't they flip the switch, I guess, in game 1, game 2, game 3? Why wait until game 4 in an elimination game and 23 minutes into it? But, the team obviously has showed heart. They showed character. They showed belief. Can they do it for 4 straight? I think that's a bigger question.
And this Islanders team, I think a lot of people kind of underrated. Same thing as last year when they swept the Penguins too. Just really good structure. But I think, myself included, I thought Washington would be in a pretty good spot here still because of all that firepower you talked about. So why have they struggled so much against the Islanders? Is it all due to their defense in New York, or is there something going wrong in Washington as well?
Yeah, I think the defense in New York is a really big part of it. I mean, obviously Barry Trotz knows the Capitals well. He knows their schemes, vice versa. But just defensively, the Islanders are so sound, and the Capitals looked like they were having trouble setting up anything, in the zone the first 3 games, or, the first 3 and a third games. And then all of a sudden kind of Capitals again kind of flipped it. But I think for the Capitals, for the most part, they've said it through 3 games. They said it was all self-inflicted errors. It was all, undisciplined minor penalties. They led the league in the regular season in minors, and that really hasn't changed in the postseason. Brendan Dillon took a minor penalty less than a minute into the game yesterday. So there's still major issues on this Capitals team. And I don't know at the end of the day if they're going to be able to fully overcome it, but at least last night was kind of that glimmer of belief that everyone was talking about.
And of course, Nick Backstrom out since game 1 as well certainly hasn't helped things for Washington. Okay, you mentioned it. They still have a really steep hill to climb here. Assuming they can't pull off this miracle comeback, how hard of a look in the mirror do you think this team does? Because, we know the superstar, Mr. Ovechkin, is 34 now, I believe, and has 1 year left on his contract. P.S. Nick Backstrom, I mentioned he's been out, but obviously he's rounded 30 as well. This would be the second year in a row after the big cup win that they would go out in the first round. You've got Braden Holtby as a UFA. So we can kind of touch on a few of those things, but just in general, I imagine this is a team that's going to be doing a lot of self-reflection here as it kind of figures out where it stands.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if they did go out in a sweep last night, I think this would have been a totally different story today. I think it would have been definitely for sure a major change needs to happen, maybe a coaching overhaul, who knows? But I don't know. I feel like after 1 win, there is kind of that, okay, maybe the Capitals can do something. What if they come back and win 2 and they make it, then they fall in game 6? I don't know what they do moving forward there, but I think, overall, it's an aging veteran core. Braden Holtby probably not going to be with the team next year. So what do you do moving forward? What do you do with kind of those younger guys like Jacob Verana, who maybe hasn't had the best postseason? What do you think his kind of future will be? What about Kuznetsov, who wasn't really having a great series, then all of a sudden turns it on last night? So I think there's a lot more questions than answers for this Capitals team. But going back to your question, I think overall they are going to have to take a long, hard look at themselves in the mirror and say, okay, what do we want to do moving forward with the last 2 years of, Ovechkin's window?
You mentioned Holtby there, and the goalie market this offseason is really interesting. There's a lot of potential number ones, or at least tandem starters that could be available for trade or in free agency. And Holtby's name is probably the biggest. You said that it's probably unlikely he comes back, but it's hard to believe that some other team is going to give him a really competitive salary after the season that he's had as well. So, I mean, is there a world where he does return to Washington with Ilya Samsonov there, and what would that contract look like? Or is it definitely he's going to be gone this summer?
Yeah, I think never say never, as Brian McClellan has kind of told us in the past now. Because obviously, Mac has made things work in the past. He's moved some guys around. He's shifted numbers and stuff like that. But just in terms of what the team mentality was headed into the season, it was very much so. This looks to be Braden Holtby's last year in net. You have a the team's anointed goaltender of the future and Ilya Samsonov. He came off to a blazing start his rookie year, really looks strong. Then all of a sudden he can't travel to Toronto because of an off-ice injury suffered in Russia. Now that's kind of up in the air. He's supposed to be fully healthy for next season, but I don't know if the team has any sort of doubts there. Maybe they look to sign Holtby for a short-term deal. Now, does Holtby want to take a short-term deal? Does he feel like he wants to go somewhere else in the longer term and probably make more money? I would assume yes. But then again, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Who knows when next season even happens? So I think there's a lot of factors yet to go. But I mean, overall sentiment was we could be watching Braden Holtby's last games as the Capital.
All right, we'll get you to speculate a little more on contract stuff. We have to ask about Ovechkin. I mean, it's been so long that he's been on this deal, basically a decade. And it's crazy to think that whenever next season starts, you mentioned it, who knows what that's going to look like, but he will be entering, barring an extension being signed, the last year of his contract. We all assume he would love to not only finish his career there, but have many more good years. Who knows, maybe even still chase down that all-time goal scoring mark. Do you have a sense at all just for where things stand or how things are likely to play out between this, all-time franchise face, all-time, player in the league and the club as they try to sort through what the kind of final chapter will look like contract-wise?
Yeah, I think all indications are that Ovechkin isn't finished yet. I think he still has, more years left in him. I think he's kind of proven that. He almost had another 50-goal season this year. People kind of thought that he would maybe slow down, and then all of a sudden you hit 700 career goals this year, score 2 back-to-back hat tricks during that span. Again, some crazy numbers, and then now he's having the postseason that he's having. But, I think Brian McClellan said right before the series that they haven't talked to Ovechkin, about extension talks yet. They wanted to wait till after the postseason, which seems pretty normal. You have to look at Nicholas Backstrom, who signed his 5-year extension this year with the team. So maybe they try to match up their contracts there and they can kind of end their careers in Washington together. But yeah, I would say overall, I don't think Ovi's time in Washington's done, but as of talks, they haven't happened quite yet.
And I would think it would be pretty valuable for the team to keep him around just as he chases Gretzky's goal record, like to have him do that as a Capital. You would hate to see him leave because something goes wrong and then he breaks Gretzky's record in some other jersey.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the Capitals are going to do everything possible to get it done. I mean, I would be shocked if they could not get that done.
It's hard to because what's that contract going to look like is the big question for me, because you've got guys that are making over $11 million now when they hit free agency, right? And Ovechkin certainly could command something like that, but you've got a flat cap. And you've got the fact that he is going to be 34 years old or 35 years old next year. So what does that number look like? It's just been complicated even more by this pandemic and the flat cap. But what would you suggest possibly that number looks like on his next contract?
Yeah, I think I was talking about it with a few other writers a couple weeks ago, and we were saying, what he's getting paid now on that, I think it's the 13-year, $124 million contract, is almost kind of right. I would assume he needs a salary bump, but again, with the flat cap, he understands that they need to pay other players on this team. They need to give him pieces in order to win another Stanley Cup. I think it should stay around the same, honestly. Now, how many years will it be? Again, I do think it might fall into that kind of mimicking Nicholas Backstrom's extension, kind of ending around the same mark there. But I would expect the same AAV, if not a little bit more. But I don't think anything crazy is going to go for him.
Call it an even 10 million and go from there, right?
There's
your easy
just sign
negotiation.
it, go. Yeah, race out the door.
Everyone's happy.
Yeah.
All right, Rory and I were talking a little bit before you joined us about the Metro division. It does feel like there's a bit of a power shift going on, right? We've seen the Pens go out in the past couple years. Washington's on the brink, and we're seeing this Islanders team that no one wants to give credit to just continue to be a thorn. We're seeing Philadelphia really emerge as a strong team, and the New York Rangers have the first overall pick, and they've already shown pretty well. Do you get the sense that it's going to be an interesting division to watch as the Pens and Caps kind of go for their last gasp, but there really are these teams biting at their heels, or in some cases passing them, it feels like already?
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of people thought that this year and next year, or maybe even last year, was kind of the last couple of years of that cup window for this Capitals team, just because you don't know what's really going to happen with, Carolina. And you're right, the Islanders, the Rangers, Columbus. Like there's so many good teams and young teams that are now coming up, and the Capitals again are getting older. They're not getting younger. So I think for them, like we've kind of said at the start of the year, this is kind of one of their maybe last 2 or 3 years of a real shot. And then who knows? So yeah, I think the Capitals are definitely in a little bit of trouble there in the Metro, and just goaltending wise as well. I mean, you have to look at all the great goalies in the Metro and what they've been doing. We didn't even talk about like the Flyers. So yeah, it should be definitely an interesting I guess moves going forward.
All right. Well, we know they've got at least one more game to go, so it means you'll be in the bubble for a little while longer. We'll see where it goes from there. Thanks so much for joining us today, Samantha.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
All right. That is Samantha Pell. She covers the Washington Capitals for the Washington Post. Thanks so much to Samantha for joining us today. Thanks to Rory. Thanks to our producers, Michael and Michael, to Sony and Mayers. And check back next week for more glass rattling hockey action on Tape to Tape.